The church, an institution that's supposed to guide us to salvation, to lift up the broken, to spread love. That's the image, right? But let's cut through the facade. Behind those beautiful stained glass windows, under the polished sermons, there's a reality nobody wants to talk about. A reality that reveals a whole different picture, a picture that looks nothing like love, but everything like control. That's what we're diving into today. For centuries, we've seen churches proclaim their message of salvation, promising eternal peace for anyone who walks through their doors. But what if, instead of leading us closer to heaven, they're steering us straight into hell? Not the fiery pits of Dante's Inferno, but something even more chilling, a life stripped of freedom, bound by fear, and led by guilt. The truth is, some churches aren't in the business of saving souls, they're in the business of obedience, of blind loyalty. Because the reality is, a lot of what gets preached isn't designed to set us free, it's designed to keep us in line. Think about it, rules piled on top of rules, punishments for straying off the path, shame for any independent thought. But they won't call it control, they'll call it guidance, protection. They'll make it sound righteous. They'll make it sound holy. And let's talk about fear, because fear is the fuel that keeps this machine running. It's a powerful tool. When you're told your entire eternal soul depends on obedience, the stakes couldn't be higher. Mess up, think for yourself, question the church, and, suddenly, you're not just risking some minor penalty, they tell you you're risking your eternal soul. They paint this terrifying picture of hell, a place so horrific that people will do anything, follow any rule, just to avoid it. It's an ancient playbook, used by those in power to maintain control. Centuries ago, the church held the power to make and break lives, and if we're honest, a lot of that mentality still hangs around. History shows us how churches sold indulgences, making people pay to cleanse their sins, to buy their way out of purgatory. Think about that for a second. They used the fear of damnation to rake in cash, creating a spiritual pay-to-play system. And we're supposed to believe this was all done to save people? The Bible itself has warnings about this kind of hypocrisy. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus calls out the religious leaders of his time, calling them whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, rotten within. That's the paradox. The church stands there, dressed in holiness, but inside, it's playing a completely different game. And here's the clincher, the illusion works. It's wrapped in tradition, masked in moral authority. And for so many people, it's hard to even imagine questioning it. Because what's at stake? Eternity. The church's purpose should be clear, guiding people, lifting up the downtrodden, promoting peace and love. But history has shown us something else entirely. Some churches don't just miss this mark, they weaponize faith itself, twisting belief into chains, and turning worship into a form of submission. It's not an exaggeration, it's been happening for centuries. During the Middle Ages, the church had a chokehold on society. It dictated how people lived, how they thought, and how they understood the world. It was the law. The church wasn't just a place to pray, it was the place where your eternal fate was decided. Salvation was theirs to offer, and for a price, they could take it away. They set themselves up as the gatekeepers of eternity. And what did that do? It made them untouchable. They had kings, armies, and entire populations under their control. People didn't just go to church because they believed, they went because they had to. It was survival. Indulgences. Confessions. Obedience. These weren't just rituals or teachings, they were tools of control. When the church said, "Obey, or you'll burn forever," they weren't just offering a choice between heaven and hell. They were setting the terms for social order, creating a hierarchy that put themselves at the top and kept everyone else in line. Now, centuries later, that grip might not look the same, but traces of it are still here. Think about the way churches can sway elections, influence laws, and control social standards. In some communities, stepping outside of church teachings is like stepping outside of society. Disagree with the dogma, and you risk being ostracized, shunned, or worse. And we see it across history. Questioning the church wasn't just frowned upon, it was criminal. Question authority, question doctrine, and suddenly you're a heretic, a sinner, an outcast. The Inquisition was just one brutal example, but even now, in subtle ways, we see the consequences for those who think for themselves, who stray from the prescribed beliefs. When Martin Luther challenged the Catholic Church, he wasn't just questioning a few rules, he was pulling back the curtain on an entire system designed to keep people fearful and dependent. And what happened? He became an enemy, a threat. Because the truth is, institutions don't like being questioned. They don't like it when people look behind the veil and see the power structures keeping them in place. This isn't about spirituality. This is about power, about control. Because for too long, some churches have thrived on keeping people in a state of fear, fear of punishment, fear of hell, fear of rejection. And fear? That's a powerful weapon. The church has always claimed to be the ultimate guide for the soul, the keeper of truth, the one path to salvation. But let's strip away that sanctified language and look at what some of these teachings really do. They don't just lead people, they confine them. They create a doctrinal trap, a cage dressed up as a compass. Here's how it works. You're taught to believe that every thought, every doubt, every action has eternal consequences. Do it wrong, think wrong, feel wrong, and you're in danger. This isn't guidance, it's psychological warfare. These teachings instill a level of self-surveillance that eats away at the soul. Questioning anything? That's your first red flag. But it doesn't stop there. You're also responsible for how much you believe with total, unwavering certainty. Stray from the narrative, and suddenly you're on thin ice. It's a system that keeps people constantly on edge, never sure if they're safe. One of the biggest traps is this twisted sense of guilt. The idea that you're inherently sinful and that you need the church to redeem you. The message is subtle but relentless. You're flawed, and the only way to fix it is by adhering to their rules, their authority. No matter how much you do, no matter how hard you try, the goalpost is always moving. You're never good enough, never faithful enough, never repentant enough. It's spiritual blackmail disguised as salvation. And let's not ignore how certain doctrines take it a step further, telling you that not only are you responsible for your own salvation, but that even questioning the church or the Bible could put your very soul at risk. It doesn't just tell people what to believe, it polices how they think. The moment you start to see things differently, the moment you think for yourself, they've convinced you that you're already halfway to damnation. It's all about control. They've built a system that keeps people in a constant state of guilt and self-doubt. It's not about helping people grow, it's about keeping them dependent. Why? Because a person who thinks they're free can walk away. But a person trapped in guilt, convinced they're nothing without the church, they stay. They submit. When people are raised to believe that even the smallest deviation could lead to hell, it's not salvation they're being given, it's bondage. And that's the true danger of the doctrinal trap. It doesn't lift people up, it crushes them, forces them into a life of spiritual paranoia. And the worst part? They're told it's for their own good. The church loves its rituals. Stand up, sit down, kneel, recite, repeat. There's a ritual for everything, from birth to death and every sin in between. It's structured, organized, almost mechanical. But here's the question nobody seems to ask: what's the point of it all? Are these rituals really about connecting with something divine, or are they just conditioning, ways to keep people obedient, distracted from the deeper questions? In theory, rituals are supposed to bring people closer to God. That's the idea. But in reality, it often feels like these actions become a barrier, a way to keep people locked into routines without ever questioning the deeper meaning. Show up, follow the motions, do what you're told, and you're saved, right? The church makes it so easy to believe that salvation is just about keeping up appearances, just about performing the right actions. The deeper stuff, the hard questions, the actual spiritual growth, it's buried under layers of tradition. Think about this: every week, millions of people fill pews, recite the same prayers, and leave without ever feeling changed. Because when you're doing things by habit, when it's just about ticking boxes, it becomes empty. And maybe that's the point. Because as long as people feel like they're doing enough by showing up and following the motions, they won't dig deeper. They won't start questioning the system or even their own beliefs. Rituals create a comfortable routine, and for some churches, that's exactly what they need to keep people coming back, comfortably numb. But here's the brutal truth: obedience alone does nothing for the soul. You can kneel until your knees bleed, but if it doesn't mean anything to you, if it doesn't move you or change you, what's the point? It's like an insurance policy, a safety net that the church dangles to make people feel secure. As long as you follow the steps, you're safe. But in the end, it's hollow, a checklist that's designed to look like devotion without requiring any actual transformation. And for those who dare to look for something deeper, to search beyond the surface, they're often told that questioning the rituals is dangerous, that it's a slippery slope away from faith. The message is clear: don't think, don't challenge, just follow. So what happens? The rituals go on, week after week, year after year. People go through the motions, acting out obedience without understanding, without connection. And the church? It stands there, reinforcing its authority, keeping people busy with routines instead of inviting them into real, transformative experiences. That's the tragedy of it all. Obedience becomes a barrier, not a bridge. It keeps people from ever really engaging with their own faith. Hell. Fire, torture, endless suffering, the ultimate scare tactic. The church has capitalized on this image for centuries, using it as the ultimate stick to keep people in line. And let's be clear, the church didn't invent hell, but it sure has perfected the art of selling it. If you want to keep people obedient, what's more effective than telling them there's a place of eternal suffering waiting if they step out of line? Look at the sermons, the teachings, the messages from the pulpit. It's relentless. They'll tell you hell is real, that it's terrifying beyond imagination, and that it's what you deserve if you even think about questioning or doubting. They create this mental image of hell as a place of constant punishment, not just for the worst of the worst, but for anyone who dares to disobey the teachings. And this isn't just about promoting faith. It's fear-mongering, plain and simple. They paint it vividly: burning lakes, endless darkness, screaming souls. It's psychological warfare, a horror story they've built up to scare people into compliance. The church creates the problem, and then, guess what? They sell the solution. The only way to avoid this eternal nightmare? Stay close, stay faithful, follow every rule without question. Hell is big business, and fear? Fear is a powerful currency. And here's the irony. So many interpretations of the Bible suggest that hell is more complex, that it's not the cartoonish torture chamber they make it out to be. Theologians have been debating this for centuries, and yet, the church holds on to the most extreme version of hell, the one that keeps people terrified. Why? Because if hell is just a metaphor, a state of separation, or something less horrific, the church loses one of its most powerful tools of control. This fear-driven narrative traps people in a cycle they can't escape. Live your life in constant dread of every choice, every thought, every sin. Step out of line, and eternal suffering awaits. It's not about enlightenment, it's about keeping people caged in terror, keeping them desperate for the church's promise of salvation. So, they sell hell. It's their ultimate weapon, their insurance policy to keep people obedient. And as long as people believe that disobedience equals damnation, they'll keep coming back, keep clinging to the church as their only way out. It's a fear industry, and it's been working for centuries. The idea of God has been hijacked. The church tells you that God lives within its walls, that it holds the exclusive key to Him. But here's the truth they don't want you to realize: God doesn't need a building, a ritual, or a rulebook to reach people. The real tragedy? The church has taken something limitless, something deeply personal, and caged it within its own walls. There's a reason so many people are walking away from organized religion. It's not that they've stopped believing, it's that they're realizing they don't need an institution to experience something real. People are finding God in nature, in moments of silence, in genuine connections with others. They're finding God in places the church would never acknowledge, places that don't demand loyalty to an institution. And what does the church say about that? They call it dangerous. They call it misguided. They say you can't trust your own experiences or feelings, only they can tell you what's real, what's divine. It's a clever move. By limiting God to their own domain, they keep people dependent. But take a step back, and you see the truth. God isn't limited by doctrine, by denomination, or by location. Spirituality doesn't have to look a certain way, sound a certain way, or fit into a pre-approved box. The church is threatened by this. Because once people realize they can connect with God without the middleman, the whole system starts to crumble. That's the freedom they don't want you to taste. A God that isn't owned, isn't controlled, isn't filtered through a rigid doctrine? That's terrifying to an institution built on dependence. There's a power in direct connection, in spirituality that's unchained. It doesn't demand blind obedience. It doesn't threaten you with hell if you question it. And it certainly doesn't require you to be in the right building at the right time, saying the right words. Real spirituality, the kind that sets people free, that transforms lives from the inside out, has no need for gatekeepers. So here's the revelation: God isn't dead, he's just been buried beneath centuries of dogma, rituals, and fear tactics. True spirituality isn't about following the church, it's about connecting with something bigger in a way that's raw, personal, and authentic. And once people start to see that, the church as we know it starts losing its grip. The core of faith, stripped of centuries of dogma, tradition, and manipulation, comes down to one word: love. But not the version that's been bent and twisted into a weapon. I'm talking about a love that's meant to liberate, not a love that's used to dominate, control, or instill fear. The kind of love that Jesus preached, radical, unconditional, the type of love that reaches across boundaries, breaks down walls, and frees people instead of locking them into submission. For centuries, this message has been hijacked, coated in doctrine, and chained to a set of rules. Instead of a source of freedom, it's been presented as a series of impossible tasks: live a perfect life, never doubt, never stray. And when you fail, the church steps in, pointing to guilt, fear, and shame as the only way back to God. That's not love. That's control. When Jesus spoke about love, he didn't wrap it in conditions, doctrines, or guilt trips. He wasn't handing out a checklist of rules, nor was he reserving his love only for the righteous. His message was simple: love your neighbor, love your enemy, love without reservation. And somehow, over centuries, that simple, liberating message became a tool for enforcing conformity and obedience. Somehow, love was replaced with rules, and freedom was replaced with chains. The church, as an institution, benefits when love is conditional. Because as long as love requires something, obedience, loyalty, guilt, fear, people will keep coming back, desperately hoping they'll be good enough, worthy enough. But that's not love, that's a transaction. And transactions are what keep institutions thriving, not what sets people free. When you take love back to its roots, it isn't something that needs to be earned or something that's doled out only to the worthy. Real love, divine love, is given freely. It doesn't demand anything in return. It doesn't require you to live in fear of hell or punishment. It doesn't ask you to go through endless rituals to prove yourself again and again. It's a love that says, you are enough as you are. This is the kind of love that dismantles the walls institutions have built. A love that, once you truly experience it, makes you question why you were ever afraid in the first place. It's a love that doesn't just set you free from the fear of punishment, it sets you free from the idea that you need someone else to reach God. You realize that God, the divine, the source of love itself, is not bound by doctrine, rituals, or the walls of any building. And here's the truth that institutions fear the most: if people find this love on their own, the power structure crumbles. If people experience a spirituality that's unchained, unrestricted, and rooted in genuine love, the need for an institution fades. There's no need for fear-driven sermons, no need for constant reminders of our unworthiness. Because a person who knows they are loved beyond conditions, who knows that they can access the divine on their own terms, that person is free. This isn't a new idea. Mystics, sages, and prophets throughout history have preached it, lived it, died for it. The idea that love is all-encompassing, that God is bigger than any building, that true faith sets you free instead of chaining you down. But institutions don't like free people. Free people don't obey blindly, they don't live in fear, and they don't keep the machine running. What if love was never supposed to be about control? What if it was always about liberation? That's the kind of love that shatters chains, the kind of love that makes people realize they don't need a middleman, don't need a gatekeeper to experience something divine. A love that empowers, that invites you to question, to explore, to grow, not out of fear of punishment, but out of a genuine desire to connect, to understand, to be part of something bigger than yourself. Imagine a world where people are motivated by this kind of love. A world where faith isn't about fear, guilt, or shame, but about genuine connection, compassion, and understanding. Where people aren't forced to conform to a rigid set of rules, but are free to find their own path to the divine. That's the kind of world we could have if we stripped away centuries of manipulation and went back to the root of faith. And maybe that's what the church was supposed to be all along, not a gatekeeper, but a guide. Not a place of restriction, but a place of liberation. A place that encourages people to find God in their own way, in their own time, and on their own terms. Because love, real love, isn't afraid of freedom. Real love doesn't demand obedience, it doesn't shame or guilt. It simply exists, without conditions, without expectations, without fear. To everyone watching, think about what faith would look like if it was rooted in this kind of love. Imagine what spirituality would feel like if it wasn't about meeting someone else's standards, but about genuinely connecting with something divine, something beyond ourselves. That's a faith that doesn't need fear to survive. That's a faith that doesn't need rules to thrive. It's a faith that's real, authentic, and powerful beyond any institution's control. Thank you for watching, for sticking around till the end. If this resonated with you, hit the like button, share it, and let's keep this conversation going. This is the kind of message that challenges, that questions, but that also opens doors. And that's what we need more of: open doors, open minds, and an open path to something real. Thanks for being here.